What we got now is a colony. But what we want to create is a new nation.
My name is Rosa Perez. I'm a former Puerto Rican political prisoner of war. I was arrested in 1980 along with 10 other compañeras and compañeros, comrades, and accused of being members of the Armed Forces for National Liberation, the FLN, a clandestine political organization that sought the independence of Puerto Rico. In 1999, I was excarcerated as a result of a long and intensified campaign that won our release, and President Clinton admitted that we were sentenced disproportionately, and that we were sentenced under political guidelines. This campaign was not only unified different sectors of the Puerto Rican society, but also in the United States, other religious sectors and social political organizations.
And even internationally.
And internationally with over 15 Nobel Peace Prize winners that joined the campaign.
And they joined the campaign for you guys to get out.
Right, correct. And
how many were you that got out?
In 1999, 11 of us were released. There was, and three stood. And these was from two different groups, because apart from the FLN, 1985, there was also from one of the clandestine organizations in Puerto Rico, the Macheteros. There were several members of their organizations that was released in 1999, and subsequently, a couple years later, a couple more came out.
Well, but you stipulated that you were a political prisoner of war. What? Can you tell me the distinction between political prisoner and political prisoner of war?
Yes, I was a direct militant. I was an armed militant of a clandestine organization, and I was captured in the process of war, of conducting activities against the government of the United States. I was an armed combatant in an anti-colonial war. So our position of prisoner of war was directly tied and associated with the international laws concerning captured combatants. And that's why we refuse to recognize any criminal jurisdiction of the United States courts to try us. And we instead advocated for the International Tribunal and for the international courts to hear our case.
So your stance was that Puerto Rico was a colony, that the United States was an illegal political power in Puerto Rico?
That's correct. Puerto Rico was militarily invaded in 1998. We are to this day militarily occupied, and at one point there was over 13 of the largest military bases of the United States in Puerto Rico occupying the country. We believe there's a bellical state, a state of war. Not that you see tanks and soldiers or troops marching down the streets, but you see a federalized police system where the FBI and the U.S. military are very much in control. Where you see right now the Homeland Security has one of their headquarters in Puerto Rico, where you see military techniques and Puerto Rico being used as a launching ground to invade other nations, like in Guatemala in '65, like in
was it DR
Nicaragua,
in 65, right?
Yes, DR in '65, Nicaragua, the attacks against the Frente Sandinista, which were actually trained in
Panama. Was it Panama in '92? I think it was, right?
Panama as well. And where you have elements still today training. You have in the town of Mayagüez, big part of land has been bought by the Israelis, and they have supposedly training grounds. There's Black Ops training in or Blackwater training in. They were training in Aguadilla and repairing military gunships, the helicopters. And you have now in Utuado paramilitary groups training.
Well, a friend of mine told me years ago that 33% of the arable land in Puerto Rico is controlled by the U.S. military.
That's correct. Some have
I've driven the whole north coast of Puerto Rico.
Yes.
You don't see a farm.
Right, and most of these lands, some have been returned, but right now, for instance, the Ceiba was closed down, and the U.S. military actually put it up for sale. And the same thing with Sabana Seca and where some of the lands in Vieques was returned to the Federal Wildlife Preserve, and there's a stipulation in there. If you read the fine print, it says. And the United States military can take over these lands from the Federal Wildlife Preserve for the security of the nation, for the security of the United States, right? Right. And so there's a fine print that they can go back, and there's actually a movement within the military to reopen Vieques for training practices. Vieques was very instrumental to the U.S. military because they trained their latest weaponry. Without worrying about environmental or even human collateral, what they call collateral damage.
They practice what, live ammunition for 200 days out of the year?
That's right.
So in a lot of ways, people are living on a war zone, but not really living in the war.
Yes, there's 10,000 inhabitants, 10,000 people living in Vieques. Before Vieques, and Vieques was used for 62 years. Before Vieques, you had Desecheo that was used for 42 years. And before Desecheo, Culebra. And then before Culebra, you had Desecheo used for 24 years. So, the island of Puerto Rico and the smaller islands have been used for live ammunition practices, have been rented out to other countries. Up till recently, you had in the internet, you can find an advertisement saying that you can practice your latest weaponry on the island of Vieques.
Wow!
So these are things that motivated us to participate in armed revolutionary movement and clandestine revolutionary movements, and that have. Even before us, the people who came before us to participate.
How much time did you do in prison?
I did 19 years and a few months and I don't know how many days. I didn't keep that much of accurate count, but I was arrested April 4th, 1980, and I came out September 10th, 1999. Those years were spent approximately 16 years in state prisons in Illinois, where I was transferred 22 times among 8 different institutions in that state.
So like 8 institutions, 22 times in 16 years?
In 16 years.
So they just bounced you around from one place to the
next?
next?
They call it the circuit. they give these euphemisms.
So you were on tour?
Euphemism. I was on tour. As a matter of fact, look at this. There was I used to play softball, and I was also a power lifter in the prisons. The times that I wasn't in segregation, and the warden, one of the wardens, used to come out and watch me play baseball, and he used to tell another prisoner that actually told me, he said that if I could have been out, I should have been out there throwing baseballs instead of bombs. I would have been a pro, right? And but he used to, every time I would get transferred, sometimes they would exchange another prisoner or two, and he would say, "Oh, we're pulling off a trade, a baseball trade," but we'll get them back, and that's what happened. I would end up in some prisons. I would, and within those 16 years, like in Menard, Illinois, which was down south near Marion, I was there 5 times, within that 16 years. So I would get transferred, and then they would send me back. And So they kept bouncing me around. They said it was a security. I was a security concern. I had too much influence in the prison because in order for you to survive in those, I did not belong to any gang. I didn't want to belong to any gang. I wasn't into the vices that are commonly found in prison, the drugs, the sexual market inside the prison system. So you have to be creative. You have to know how to maneuver, and you have to become a psychologist and a sociologist at the same time, and get your degree in that in order to maneuver away from certain conflicts and in order to make your time more productive. Malcolm X said that the prison became his university, and that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to create the prisons into another what we call a trinchera or a trench, another base of operation, right? A base of work, not necessarily to recruit people, but to maintain that line, that discipline that we had as a movement and as combatants. So what we would do, and what I did in particular, was I established cultural committees inside every prison that I went to. The purpose of these cultural committees was to present the prison population that was divided into gangs, especially the Latin American community, that were divided into two main sectors, gangs that were in conflict. Present them with a neutral ground, something that they can have in common, something where they can celebrate their particular historical holidays, like the Cinco de Mayo for the Mexicans, like a Grito de Lares for the Puerto Ricans, like a Grito Jara for the Cubans. So we presented the community, the prison community, with an alternative, and it functioned. It functioned real well. When some prisons we call it the Latin American Cultural Committee, and others we call it the Hispanic Cultural Exchange Committee. We will find names that was suitable, that was soft for the administration to accept as well. And we would do activities, and we would have our own food sometime and celebrate our culture. Another aspect of that I had to deal with was nutritional stuff. I had to eat well. I did not trust the food in the kitchen. I did not trust the medical services in the prison. So I cooked a lot. One of the things I would do is invent a little stove or an oven where I can cook inside the cell. And so I cooked. I would get raw food and cook it inside the cell. Became a vegetarian as well, and I exercised a lot. I had a regiment of exercising, and you pick up little things like the arts, like painting, like writing. So I wrote a lot of poetry. I painted. I became a portrait painter, and I read a lot. And those were survival mechanisms. Those are things because prisons are meant to strip you out of any sense of humanity. Once those prison doors shut, you're not supposed to care for anyone, your fellow, the person next to you. You're not supposed to you're supposed to break ties with your community and with families. And you're not supposed to feel. You're not supposed to feel any compassion, any feel the pain of others. And that was contrary to what we were all about. We became involved in the political movement because we felt the pain of others as well as our own, and because we identified and we were in solidarity with these people.
Do you find it ironic that because of your, call it, hypersensitivity to people's plight, that you're put in a place where you're meant to be desensitized?
Yeah, I mean, but and especially in the case of the political prisoner, there's certain conditions that are added to that that are not necessarily part of the experience of the common prisoner. For instance, we were put in position immediately where we were demonized to the prison. We weren't just a convict. we were, these super convicts who you had to stay away from, where other convicts had to stay away from because you will get marked. We were, all our movements on an hourly basis were written down, what we did, who we spoke to, who was in our cell, what we ate. Every movement was monitored. At one point, I had a camera facing my cell all the time. At one point, I had to take a mugshot every month and move out of my cell, not only out of my cell, but out of the gallery to another gallery. And these are cells that gangs try to control, control blacks. So you were put in direct conflict. In the beginning, they used to have a computer system called the Plato system that was being taught in the university, in the college program, in the prisons, and we weren't allowed to use it. And then a week later, they eliminated the program and told the prisoners that the reason they eliminated them was because we had put in a petition to be able to go to college to finish our degrees.
So they were trying to pit other prisoners against you.
Exactly. And
did it work in any way?
No, it didn't. As a matter of fact, contrary to that, we went on a hunger strike. After the first year, we went on a hunger strike, and all the prisoners united and told the warden that, because the warden threatened to force feed us, that if they force feed us and that they will go into a riot situation. And these were the gang leaders who approached the warden with this, to not let us die first, and to not force feed us, because we went into a 11-day hunger strike with just water, where a lot of us, I lost 22 pounds. Alejandrina developed a heart condition, and there was different medical situations.
So were you guys all in the same prison, or?
No, we were divided. In the first 2 years, the first year I was with Carlos Alberto Torres in the state of Menard, the state of Illinois in Menard Correctional Center. The year we were tried in the federal court after the first year with the same exact evidence. So due process was thrown out the window.
Wait, so there were state charges and there were federal charges, and
correct.
Were they exactly the same charges?
No, the state charges were weapons and arms and stolen vehicles, but it was within a conspiracy. And I was sentenced to 30 years.
It was just conspiracy, or just a conspiracy?
Yeah, it was just a conspiracy. Yeah.
Right. Was it RICO at that time, or?
No, not the state.
Okay.
And then the federal was conspiracy to overthrow the U.S. government. Then within that was bombings, and weapons and stolen vehicles and stuff like that. So my case was armed violence, armed robbery, and weapons and stolen vehicle.
But you were never charged with actually having done anything.
Well, in the state I was. In the state I was charged with armed robbery and armed violence, and I got 32 years for that. 30 years. And the other two was fights inside the courts, contempt of courts.
But there was some specific cases? Those
were specific cases against Alicia and myself. The others got sentenced on conspiracy along with us.
Well, what was the case if there was armed robbery and armed? Was it armed robbery?
That was when we got captured. There was a truck that was stolen.
Okay.
And it was stolen from a renter truck, and there was an armed robbery and armed violence because someone was hurt and the truck was stolen, and that was the case. And then
so you two were
Alicia and I were charged with that.
Right.
The others were charged with conspiring with us.
Okay.
And then in the a year later, federal court sentenced all of us to seditious conspiracy, which is conspiracy to overthrow the U.S. government.
And then, so are these concurrent sentences?
Yes, this is one on top of the other. Finish one and start the other one. And
so how many years were you essentially given after both state and federal time? What was your total?
My total was 105 years plus 2 years more for contempt of court. And I had received another case.
Why the contempt of court? Because you refused to participate?
Yes, every time I would enter the court, I refused to face the judge. I refused to allow the judge to read my case, what I was being tried for, and a fight would occur because the Bayes would force me to face the judge. I would turn around and they got a little abusive, and I returned the favor, and so at one point I even caught a case because
How old are you when all this
I
happened?
was 19 years old.
You're 19 years old.
Yes, and
You're 19 years old. And you have the political awareness of, I would imagine, someone beyond your years.
Well, that's relative, right? Because I think there might have been, Jonathan Jackson.
Right. But I mean,
was 17, right? But
these are anomalies.
Yeah,
You don't find 17-year-olds who understand prisoner of war stance. With Geneva Convention and so on and so forth.
I just think that I responded to certain situations at a certain time, and I don't see it as something extraordinary. I don't see it beyond anybody's capacity or capability. I just think that I responded to certain things at a certain time when they affected me, and I think I was politically prepared to deal with it at that particular moment. So to make the decision, I remember when I was asked to become part of the clandestine movement, and I responded with a yes right away, and the person said, "We don't want you to respond right now. We want you to think about it. This is something." But I felt that it was a natural thing for me to do, a natural step. It was in line.
It was part of the progression that you were going.
It was part of the political progression because I have been in community work. I had been doing political work in the community. I was doing, and I knew that sooner or later the commitment and the intensity would heighten. So I was prepared for it, and I knew the consequences, and I responded. I responded to the calling, right? And so I don't see it as something out there so much that
I only say it's an anomaly because most people aren't there. Not that they can't be there.
Right. Okay.
Not that they can't be there. Not that a 19-year-old or a 17-year-old or even a 15-year-old doesn't have the capacity to understand these complicated concepts. But
I think I was
socially,
fortunate.
that's not the thing.
Yeah, I was fortunate that at a young age I was surrounded by real good models, real good role models in terms of political activism. People that I looked up to, people that were my mentors. I read a lot. People that gave me the ammunition in that sense, the tools for me to study beyond just the books that you read in school, in regular public schools. I had access. I had libraries that taught me about Patrice Lumumba. I had activities that I would learn about the Eritreans. My first activity to the Eritreans, someone asked me, write a poem. We're going to an activity with the Eritreans, write a poem of, I was like the person that they'd say, okay, we go to an activity, write a poem. And I didn't never consider myself a poet, but, and I said, who the hell are the Eritreans? What are they? So these type of things, you learn about other people's struggles, other people's culture, and you learn to identify and be in solidarity with Palestinians, with Iranians, with everybody. And so you start saying that there's so much in common. I was born August 6, 1960, in Chicago, Illinois. On the day I was born, my father, Felix Rosa, was kidnapped and assassinated and drowned in Lake Michigan. I was born as a result of an attack that my mother had. I was born 8 months. I was a premature baby. So my life pretty much came about as an act of struggle, as an act of even resistance on the part of my mother. I was raised in Chicago, Illinois. I had another brother at that time, an older brother, Felix Rosa, and later on my mom remarried and had 4 other children. So there's 6 in the family. All of us was born and raised in Chicago. We were part of that diaspora that migrated in search of better opportunities. The schooling system in Chicago was a system that negated any type of history relative to Puerto Rico. We were deculturalized in a sense in the school systems of Chicago. The housings, we were bounced around from one house to another because at one point the landlord said that my mother had too many kids. 3 was the limit, and so often we would get evicted. And oftentimes my mom hid some of her children in order for the landlords to accept us in the new housings. That continued around until 1970. And then we pretty much relocated in a place where we stood there for a while in a building that my grandfather owned. In the 1970s, I entered the high school systems. 1974, as a result of some riotings, uprisings in the community to rename a school after the death of Roberto Clemente. We were victorious and named the first public high school in the Puerto Rican community, Roberto Clemente. And I was one of the first graduate. I was among the first graduating class of that school. My involvement in politics became around that age, around 12 years old, when I participated in several marches against police brutality and arson for profit. Arson for profit was a technique that was used by landlords that did not live in the community, that wanted to collect insurance and would pay someone to burn the apartment buildings, which many of us lived in. And so that became a way of displacing us. It was part of early gentrification.
What year was this?
This was in 1972, 73. At that time, already the plans for gentrification were known in Chicago as the Chicago 21 plan for the 21st century. What the city of Chicago would look like. They have maps already designed in City Hall where you can look at the blueprints of this gentrification program. So I became politically active in that sense when I was attending a meeting, and while everyone was speaking, the adults, I was in a little corner sketching, doodling, and what I had sketched was basically what was being mentioned in the meeting, and they used my sketch as the leaflet for that march against the police.
So was your mother involved in the anti-gentrification?
No, actually, my mother was very apolitical. She was she was a
So
house
how was it that at 12 years old you were at a meeting?
Well, several things happened. One, that we were walking. My brother and I were walking one day towards our school, and we got picked up by Carlos Alberto Torres, who gave us a ride. Carlos Alberto Torres was a community activist at the time, a few years older than us, and invited us to become part of a project that was to become the first alternative high school. And my brother accepted a year later, but I declined because at that time I was very much involved into athletics and sports, and I knew the school didn't have a baseball team that I could join, so I said no. But I did. After school, I would go into the high school and meet up with my brother, and so I became familiarized with the aspects of the high school in that sense. And at that time, there was only 8 students in a room that was about 10 by 10, a real small basement room, and that's where all the classes would occur.
So was this a kind of like a freedom school?
This was yeah, I think that's the first what we would call the first liberated territory in the community. Because out of that project, it was a project that Oscar Lopez and Jose Lopez and Carlos Alberto, Carmen Valentin, all they were the architects of this project.
So how old were they, and how old were you at this time?
I think they were in their 20s, and I was around 12 or 13 years old. I was not yet in high school.
Okay.
And
So you're junior high school age, and they're
right.
just in college, or
They're just entering college, or
just
some of them are
coming
just
out,
right.
coming out of college.
Some coming out of college, right? And so this project continues today after 40 years to graduate 98% of the students who have been kicked out or pushed out of high schools. It is an exemplary high school that has won awards as well, and very enrooted in the community. So this high school project, the people there later on, because we were also involved with street organizations, street gangs, and someone saw that we had a potential to organize in a community at that level, at the street gang level. They invited us to this meeting, and like I said, I was in a corner doodling, and my leaflet was picked out, and next thing you know, I had a bullhorn, and I was part of leading this march against the police. And from there on, my activism became increased.
Was your brother older than you?
My brother's 1 year older, Felix. Okay. So I went into high school. In high school, we organized cultural committees and different organizations. At the same time, I was very involved in the movement to free the nationalist prisoners. This was 1974. I was 14.
And the nationalists, you mean Lolita?
Lolita Lebron, Oscar Collazo, Irving Flores, Andres Figueroa Cordero, and Rafael Cáncer Miranda. As a matter of fact, I used to write them poetry to Lolita Lebron and Rafael Cáncer. And later on, I would meet them in 1979.
When Carter pardoned them.
Pardoned them, yes.
Was that a full pardon?
That was a full pardon. And it's funny because we were in New York at that particular moment when we received the news. And I was teaching, I was 17 years old, I think, 18 years old, and I was teaching a drama class in the high school. And we were bringing a play to New York that we had written. And we were performing at a place in Manhattan called Cuando. And we received a call, and halfway through the presentation, we had to announce that the nationalists were being freed. And that night, several of us left New York, drove back to Chicago to set up the security to receive the nationalists. And it was an event that inspired the whole community. People were crying on the streets. There was thousands of people attending, waiting to meet them and greet them. And it was, there's no words to describe what it feels like to receive these heroes. They were our heroes. They were the people that we looked up to as for moral guidance and for political guidance, and to come face to face with them was very important. So the molding of a political conscience does not happen overnight, and does not happen with just one particular experience. Everything falls into place. How the family structure. For instance, in my family, the women played a major role. It was like a matriarch structure where the grandmother, the mother, the aunts played a major role into molding you. The uncles and all played a more of a strengthening the structure that the women had built. So you became sensitive to certain issues as well. You became sensitive to certain needs, in particular, to the food, to the nurturing, to the conditions, the living conditions. So those became issues that you were very familiar with and that you wanted to address. I was a young father, like I said, and my son was born while I was still in high school. So there was a need for me to also contribute to his present and his future. Uh, Basically, that's it. I entered the University of Illinois, where I was uh, became the president for the Union for Puerto Rican Students in my first year. I was studying. At first, I decided to study electronics engineer. After I gave it a shot at law, I wanted to study law as well. But my main concern was electronics engineer. And
So did you switch your major to law?
no, I switched from pre-law to electronics engineer. I thought there was too many lawyers in the world. We need one more. We didn't need one more. So
But electronic engineers were needed?
yeah, I think electronics engineers, are more needed than lawyers. And I didn't have too much faith in the legal system in this country. Sure, some things can be battled there, and it can be used as a forum at times, but I didn't see I didn't see real justice happening there in the legal systems in that particular era.
What about now?
Now maybe less, but
When you make a decision to become a part of this clandestine armed organization, are there any unintended consequences that you can't possibly think of, but you understand the ramifications for yourself?
right.
But are there other ramifications that you didn't imagine that you have to deal with, or that you had to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, when you accept the responsibilities, you accept them, understanding that there are possibilities that you are going to get captured, that you might get killed in an operation, or that you have to live in the underground and separate yourself from the community, from your family. Those were real consequences. Those are ones that we witnessed in other comrades who were either imprisoned or lived in the underground or died in the process. You can prepare yourself for this. And the more you internalize what you represent, what you're in there for, or what your commitment is about, the more you can become prepared for incarceration or whatever. What you can't prepare yourself for is what's happening to those loved ones of yours that were the basis or were the inspiration for your involvement, who are now dealing with a whole new situation. How do they deal with my incarceration? How does a mother deal with her in the case of Alejandra FIFO, Josefina Rodriguez, dealing with two daughters and a son-in-law in prison? How does Jose Alberto, Carlos Alberto's father, deal with his son and his daughter-in-law in prison? How does my mother deal with my incarceration and later on my brother's incarceration when she wasn't politicized to the level of understanding what this political commitment meant? So it was abstract to her. It was an impossibility for her. I was the first in the family to enter college. All my uncles and aunts lived vicariously through my experience of graduating from high school, of entering college, of maybe becoming the first either lawyer or doctor or whatever.
Were these things that you thought about before you made your decision? Did they enter into your thought process or your decision making process?
No, I can't. I don't remember. You would almost brush through them, saying, "Well, what if this happens?" I would my mind, but the necessity to engage in this form of struggle was so high that if I thought about it, I probably just thought about it lightly. In hindsight, perhaps that wouldn't have changed anything, but I would have liked to have thought about it a little more and maybe put a little more importance to how, and maybe even try to prepare my mother to accept that I was wanting to intensify my level of commitment to the struggle for independence of Puerto Rico. Whether she agreed with it or not, just that she understood that I was prepared to go at another level, and I don't know if that would have even helped because my mom is so close to us. It's so, and like any mother, that love is so intense that any pain automatically gets translated into a personal loss, a personal pain for her. So my mom and actually my family became one of my greatest supporter and adopted all my comrades as family members as well. So the experience
Politicized them?
it politicized them and it brought us even closer together. No doubt that it was painful. They were what happens at the process is once we're captured, the whole strategy of the federal government, or the whole strategy of our jailers, was to break our will and to get us to turn. When that doesn't happen, they concentrated on family. So the repression, in my sense, I think they visited me once, and as soon as I told them, as soon as I saw him, I said, "You smell like FBI." And when I seen the guy reach for his wallet, I told him to go fuck himself and turned around and walked out. And that was it. I didn't see him anymore. But once they saw that, then they focused on family. There was a kidnapping attempt on my son at 3 years old, where an FBI agent grabbed him, ran with him, and if it wasn't for the people waiting for the bus along with his mother that jumped on him, and he threw the baby and ran into the car, we grabbed his plates, and there were FBI plates. My mom was visiting me at the prison, and the prison ambulance jumped the curb and hit her in the head with the mirror and gave her a concussion. My grandfather was put at gunpoint by an FBI agent, and he subsequently had a heart attack. He didn't die, but he had a minor stroke. My grandmother was interrogated, and they snuck into her house while she was watching a soap opera and interrogated her. My cousin was forced to close down his business and move. My brothers were harassed. My younger brothers were harassed and threatened to be thrown in prison as well. So all these harassments. Then you find Eddie Cortez's brother on the way to visit him. A truck climbs down on top of the car, and he ends up paralyzed for life. One of our lawyers is going into her car, and a garbage truck passes real close by and takes half her leg off. Another lawyer in New York is visiting in a park bench, and a car jumps the curb and crashes into him and partially paralyzes that person. All these things. An ex-girlfriend of mine who was interrogated by the FBI, who they investigated with her professors at the university, was found dead at a hospital when she went for a checkup. So all these things, some people might see it as consequences, but when they come within a framework, when they come within a time span, you have to think that they were part of a strategy to break our will, and it didn't work. It didn't work. I think we came out from the experience stronger. And I'm not saying that prison does not mark you, because it marks you for life. There's an effect that happens. You do some suffering, and that's an imprint in your mentally and in your psyche. But I think we came out stronger. We came out more mature and politically. We came out more mature in sense of how to deal with people, because you learn inside prison how to deal with different attitudes, and how to hear people. One of the things that I think some of us lack, and it's common within movements, is that there's a lot of talking and you don't pay attention to what the other person's saying, and I think that's very important. So I think
how did you did you have moments of doubt in prison, or even
No.
before you were in prison?
no, I never had a moment of doubt.
That maybe, I shouldn't have made this decision.
No, and I never regret a decision. I know I made mistakes, but
So you regret the mistakes, but not the decision.
right. And I regret the mistakes in the sense that I'm very analytical, in the sense that I try to analyze things to the detail, and when something goes wrong, I try to go back to the kernel, to the root.
Right.
And I'm very self-critical, but being self-critical and having a doubt are two different things. And I think I am very self-critical. I have made mistakes, and I try to correct them when I can. But I've never had a doubt about my commitment. I never had any regrets about my commitment. And I never felt it was in vain. I think that we served a purpose. We continue to serve a purpose, and I am honored for honored that I had the experience to serve this cause.
Un pueblo que está sometido a todo lo que hemos estado sometidos nosotros, tiene que estar preparado para ejercer su derecho de la forma que sea, y si es la lucha armada, es la lucha armada.